Okay, everybody, might as well get started. I think most of the people are here. So thank you for joining. I'm just going to share with you my presentation. Just 1 second. Can everyone see my slideshow? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Make it bigger. Okay. So today, everybody, we decided to basically zoom in to a conversation with Max Moratelli from Woollahra Council as the team leader. Just first, there's a couple of housekeeping, just reminders, please turn on your video so we can see you and mute yourself. Most of you, I think, are muted already. Secondly, we will have a Q&A session at the end of basically, I'm going to have a quick presentation followed by Max. And I will say, though, at the beginning that for the Q&A session, if you can just keep your questions general rather than specific to DAs you might have or specific sites that you're looking at for clients or your own site. Okay, so I'm going to cover with you guys to start off with the DA approval process, as well as some of the key issues that that we're all finding with councils and DAs, and also the economic issues associated with DAs and projects at the moment. Also, I'm going to briefly talk about some planning reforms that the state government has introduced in the last month or two. And then we're going to hand over to Max. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A session for you guys. So just quickly a bit about Navon Planning, what we do. We are urban planners, obviously. Our focus is DAs and council approvals. We have projects in around 27 councils at the moment across Sydney and New South Wales, including obviously Woollahra Council. We do prepare DAs, SCEs, and I like to say that we advocate for projects. So that's essentially what we do. We ensure that the project goes as smoothly as possible through council. I also regularly am asked to represent clients at the Land Environment Court as an expert witness. Okay, so here's a quick client testimonial. I don't want to share this with you to be boastful or anything, but the highlighted comments is something that I thought would be useful to share, particularly in the context of this topic that we've chosen today. So the client replied and said, you know, he made a comment. He said it was like a precision military operation, this particular DA. Often, yeah, DAs do feel like it's us versus them. But today I want to try and break down the barriers between us and them, us and councils, not just Woollahra Council, but all councils. And I want to try and make this an interesting format so that we can both learn something, as well as hopefully you'll be able to share and use some tips that Max is going to share with you for your next DA or for your current DA to make it a much smoother process for you and your clients. This is just a flow chart that we share with all clients, but I can see there's a few architects and building designers that I work with at the moment, so you may have seen this before, but generally this is a flow chart showing on the left column the pre-DA stage, preparing the actual DA, and on the right column you'll see what happens after the DA. Now you'll know that after the DA is lodged, it takes a lot longer to get assessed through council, etc. But really this shows you essentially that there's a lot to do before you lodge your DA, and it's pretty critical that you get things right. Otherwise, as Max will tell you shortly, you are going to get into trouble if you submit a DA that's missing critical information. So just generally, we would always meet with the client on site. Then we provide advice and writing the reports for the DA. For me personally, writing the reports is really the easy part of the job. It's quite straightforward. It's rather giving clients and architects and building designers upfront advice, ensuring that the proposal complies as much as possible. However, not all projects can physically comply. And then moving forward, we submit the DA, and we generally are in contact with councils every 3 to 4 weeks just to follow up the progress of the DA. And we're there to respond to any issues that come up. And hopefully there's an approval at the end of the process. So there's two key issues that I want to focus on today. One is the economic factors, which I think everyone is well aware of, as well as issues associated with councils. So the economic factors include low unemployment rates. While that's a good thing, it is in a way a negative thing in terms of inflation and the cost of living that we're all facing, including our clients. Obviously, the cost of building works is just through the roof. Someone told me recently, just for a first floor addition to a house in Bondi, they got a quote for $1.2 million to do a first floor addition, whereas I think another quote came in about, I think, 800 grand. So the costs are just crazy. So getting an approval is one thing. The next thing is whether the clients can actually afford to build the projects that they had approved. So the issues associated with councils at the moment, I'm sure you're familiar with most of them. I'm not targeting Woollahra Council in these slides. It's happening with all the councils across the state. So obviously staffing hasn't recovered since COVID. That's a systemic issue across all councils. The sheer volume of DAs that councils are receiving has been huge, and they can't keep up with the volume of DAs. You'll see in the next bullet points a few statistics. So firstly, this statistic comes from the New South Wales Department of Planning, that last year, or I guess 2 years ago, that the average was 69 days for a DA. Now it's blown up to 116 days for a DA. But the next point I've included here basically says that on average it's taking 124 days compared to the last financial year, which was 99 days. And this includes once you've lodged the DA. So you know, once you lodge the DA on planning portal, it might take a week or two or however long to actually formally, for council to formally accept and lodge your DA. So I thought it makes sense to include that timing too, because you've got to include the whole process, not just the time, I think, once the DA is formally lodged in council. And obviously there's issues associated with the planning portal. That's probably an issue for the state government as well as councils. I think we all know what those issues are. Don't have to explain them here. And the internal issues, I guess, with councils include they have lots of controls. It's not, they're not making things easier for us. Plus, sometimes the controls we look at, it's a matter of interpretation. For example, FSR is a classic one. Building height is also can also be measured differently across councils, as well as other controls like landscaping and setbacks. So while we have a whole bunch of controls, us as town planners, we have a whole bunch of controls to pour through. It's a matter of interpreting them according to the way councils interpret them also. As architects and building designers, you'll know clearly councils are not just looking for floor plans and elevations anymore. They're looking for a whole suite of plans, including 3D elevational shadow diagrams, a lot more reports from consultants and engineering plans, stormwater plans. I've got a project at the moment with an architect based in Melbourne for a Sydney-based project, and he is gobsmacked by the amount of documentation we have to submit just for a general DA. For example, stormwater plans in Melbourne, they don't have to submit stormwater plans. That's done at the next stage. So there's a lot more documentation required for DAs, which obviously pushes up the price for our clients. There's a real risk of appeals for councils, because while you might be able to skip the queue, taking an appeal, a DA to an appeal, what this does is the council staff have to refocus their attention on assessing the regular DAs to your court case. And more often than not, councils outsource the town planning work and other consultants and other experts to manage that appeal process. So appeals are a real risk and an issue for council. But obviously, if you need to lodge an appeal, you should do it. I hope Max isn't listening. And then the other issue is delays with referrals. So you might lodge a DA for a renovation or for a house or a block of apartments. It doesn't go to just one department in council, it goes to numerous. It might go to 3 or 4. And the delays that we're seeing at the moment are really stuck with council's engineers, not just Woollahra, or all councils, engineers, as well as council's tree officers, their own arborists. Now, traditionally, council's arborists, their tree officers, are out there. If someone applies to remove a tree, for example, they're there, they'll inspect whether you can remove the tree or not. But when you lodge a DA that involves tree removal, again, that takes the focus off of them from a regular routine tree inspection, that a tree that needs to be removed, to a complex DA involving a development that requires either a tree to be removed or a tree that should try and be retained. I've put here just an image, an us versus them mentality. I think, after this webinar, hopefully we'll be able to delete this image, because I feel that it should really be a working relationship with councils. And that's what I want to achieve after today's webinar. So here are a few statistics, this slide and the next slide. So this is from a Sydney Morning Herald article of all the naughty councils that refuse DAs, taken from 2021. You'll see the first 3, the top 3 are probably the smallest councils in New South Wales. And they are refusing, have it in the past, refused the most number of DAs across all councils. You'll see Waverley or Woollahra kind of sitting at a similar level, which is good in a way. From an eastern suburbs point of view, Randwick Council doesn't list there, which is good. Again, I don't know what the latest statistics are, but this is what I could find from 2021. But this tells you, and this is something I tell my clients too, councils are there, believe it or not, to approve DAs. They're not in the business of refusing DAs. So, you're usually in good hands with council, that they want to approve your DA, and I guess you've got to give them the ability to make that decision. These statistics were taken off the New South Wales planning dashboard, which if you just punch that in, you can look it up yourself. It drills down into a whole bunch of other statistics, and you can go by count, per council, but this shows an overall picture of all councils across New South Wales. Now, I've highlighted some interesting statistics for you. compares the current financial year to the previous financial year. So you'll see, for example, the last financial year there was 81,000 DAs that were submitted, and this financial year it's 59,000, so it's substantially less. But then when you look further down, the average time from a DA lodging, it took 16 days last year. Sorry, I'll go to the next statistic. 83 days it took on average to determine a DA in the last financial year, and this financial year, which is about to finish, it's taken 106 days. Now you can see the problem here, that the volume of DAs is substantially less, but the time it takes for councils to assess your DA is a lot more. And you can probably find other bits and pieces from this slide also. But overall, I think we're all feeling the pressure, not just from our clients, but also councils are also feeling the pressure with these crazy statistics. So there are three planning reforms that the state government has announced in the last 1 or 2 months, including the cadetship program, which was initially started, I believe, last year, which was focused on regional councils. So encouraging or financially helping regional councils to speed up their assessment of DAs. That's now expanded to Sydney Metro councils also. And what they're doing now is they're giving councils grants of up to $25,000 to hire graduate town planners. Now, I guess there's an issue too with, I saw some comments floating around on LinkedIn regarding this, that while it's a very noble incentive or initiative by the state government, dealing with junior town planners can sometimes create issues with DAs, and which could lead to poor planning outcomes. The other announcement made more recently relates to boosting affordable housing. So this only applies though for projects over $75 million. So I'm not sure if this is entirely relevant for people in this Zoom meeting, but nevertheless, it's still something I think that's quite a substantial improvement to the system. It'll probably focus on, it'll probably apply to projects like in Western Sydney and the northwest and southwest growth centres, and probably in the city, but not really to too many plots of land or projects in the eastern suburbs. And you can see here that there are incentives with FSR as well as building height for projects that meet the criteria. So this is my last slide. This is something that was just announced a few days ago by the state government, that they're removing, they're getting rid of the Greater Cities Commission and the Western Parkland City Authority, and they're sending these up to at least 300 staff to these back to the state government. Now I've shared this quote by Chris Menz, the Premier, which I thought was quite relevant. He says, there's no point having housing targets if you can't deliver the housing. This is about ensuring we have the right team in place to deliver the housing and infrastructure we so critically need in this state. So you can see this is quite a reverse to the strategic planning focus that we had, in the green paper and the white paper, maybe 5 years ago or so. So it's reversed now. So that there was a whole focus for strategic planning, but now the government's realised that there's a real shortfall of housing, plus there's not enough council staff to cope with the volume of DAs. And hopefully this will feed into, these staff will hopefully somehow feed back into councils, and encouraging and helping councils to speed up their timeframes with DAs. So that's, I hope that was useful for you guys. Perhaps some of you knew this stuff already, but I'm going to now pass you on to Max, who'll share with you his presentation.
Thanks, Ellie.
1 second, I'm just going to let you be host. So Max, I've made your presentation screen as host.
Great, thank you.
So, yeah.
Thanks for joining us today. It's great to see so many people online, and there's a few familiar faces and familiar names as well, which is great to see.
Max, sorry to interrupt you. You just need to make your screen bigger. You have to press play. Yep, that's it.
Okay, all good. So my name is Max Moratelli. I'm one of the development assessment team leaders at Woollahra Council. So I'll just start off by expanding a bit on the context of Woollahra Council and touching on a few points that Ellie's made as well. So Woollahra Council is a relatively small council in terms of area and population size. However, we're also quite densely populated, being in the top 10 most densely populated councils within Sydney. Secondly, our demographics are different from many other council areas within Sydney, in that we have relatively more affluent and also more engaged residents who are well informed about planning issues and local development. And thirdly, we've got quite a rigorous set and encompassing set of planning controls. So these incorporate extensive heritage planning controls, which cover multiple heritage conservation areas that encompass entire suburbs such as Woollahra, Paddington and Watsons Bay, as well as many smaller neighbourhood heritage conservation areas. So to expand on what Ellie has already discussed in terms of the planning context, many of the challenges that we're dealing with at Woollahra in the development assessment space are similar to the challenges facing many other councils across Sydney. And these include changing planning controls, attracting and retaining skilled planners and technical staff, and legislative changes from the New South Wales Department of Planning. So the main planning documents that we have at Woollahra are the Woollahra LEP 2014 and the Woollahra DCP. These have been subject to frequent amendment over the past several years. Currently, the most significant reform, which some of you may be aware of, is the proposal to introduce an FSR to low density development across the local government area. So Woollahra is different from many other Metro Sydney councils in that we do not have an FSR standard for residential development in the R2 zoning. Since 2015, alternatively, we've had a floor plate control, which is a DCP control governing the development potential and bulk and scale of development. So as a result of this new change, Woollahra will remove the floor plate control from the DCP and will be introducing an FSR control across the LGA. And this will be implemented in conjunction with other amendments to the DCP requiring new minimum areas of tree canopy for sites and deep soil landscaping. So these changes will have a significant effect in terms of the way that development is assessed within Woollahra. And this is especially the case with regards to development in the R2 zone. In particular, the tree canopy controls are quite novel in the Sydney context, and I expect that they'll prove to be a learning curve for both council assessment staff as well as applicants. In terms of the FSR control, this will also have significant repercussions for development assessment. And I note that any variation to FSR standards will need to be varied by clause 4.6 under the LEP. As this is a legal prerequisite to granting consent It will be important for applicants to engage a planner who's experienced and capable in this area. Another challenge that we're dealing with in Woollahra is attracting and retaining qualified planners and technical staff. As Ellie has already mentioned, this is a problem that's affecting many councils across Sydney and New South Wales. Within the Woollahra LGA, there are a few additional factors that are contributing to this, and these include lack of affordable housing within the local area and the length of travel time needed to reach the Woollahra area from many other parts of Sydney and lack of effective transport options. Unfortunately, these factors tend to disproportionately affect young planners and those who are starting off in their careers. These issues have obvious knock-on effects in terms of assessment times and lost productivity, in terms of staff turnover and training new employees. Whilst we've seen a minor reduction in DA numbers this year, over the last 12 months, we've also experienced a minor increase in DA processing times, and this is partly attributable to these factors. Other issues that we're dealing with include implementing changes that are being rolled out by the Department of Planning. So, for example, changes requiring applicants to use the planning portal, and more recently, changes requiring all council determinations to be prepared by standard formats on the planning portal. So moving on to advice that I give applicants in terms of improving their experience with the DA process. The first thing that I tell applicants to avoid delays in DA assessments is ensuring that you have the correct documentation ready upon lodgement. So in addition to the statement of environmental effects and architectural drawings, which are required for all applications, many of the DAs that we deal with require further specialised documents, such as geotechnical and structural reports for development involving excavation, agricultural impact assessments for development that affects trees or within the vicinity of trees, heritage impact statements for development in the conservation area, and detailed stormwater designs for substantial alterations and additions and new development. Over half of all new applications that are lodged with Woollahra Council are subject to requests for additional information upon lodgement. In my experience, most of the time these requests are for technical documents relating to stormwater, geotechnical or agricultural reports. So how do you make sure that you have the right documents? Firstly, any consultants that you engage need to be familiar with both the DCP and the Woollahra DA Guide. Between them, these two documents will cover the majority of any potential information that will be requested by council. When I say your consultants need to be familiar, I don't mean only the planners and the architects, but also technical consultants such as the engineers, any heritage consultants or arborists. Another option, which is recommended especially for applicants who might not frequently work within the area, is the Woollahra pre-DA consultation service. So pre-DA gives applicants and their consultants the opportunity to meet with council staff, including planners and any other specialist staff, and receive written feedback prior to the lodgement of the DA. By resolving issues that are raised at the DA stage, you ensure that your DA can be assessed once it's lodged, rather than having it be put on hold pending further information. The second piece of advice I'd give applicants is to respond to the planning controls when designing your proposal. This may sound obvious, but many people fail to take this into account, often due to a lack of understanding or familiarity with the controls. An experienced planning consultant can assist immensely in helping a development application to respond to the planning framework. Many applications that we deal with are designed with minimal input from the planner, who is frequently engaged after the design has already been finalised, in order to prepare the statement of environmental effects and justify any non-compliances. As an alternative to this, I'd recommend that the planning consultant is engaged early on in the process so as to provide meaningful input into the design. Responding to the planning controls is easier said than done, and it doesn't always mean complying with every control in the DCP and every standard within the LEP. Sound DA assessment practice allows for variation to the planning controls, but exceptions should always be appropriately justified based on special site characteristics, local context, or the planning merit of the proposal. Councils and planning panels typically take a stricter approach in the application of LEP standards, such as FSR and height limit, in comparison to DCP controls, which under the EPA Act legislation should be applied with a degree of flexibility. With the transition in Woollahra from a floor plate control under the DCP to an FSR control under the LEP, this will have significant implications for development, which entails planning non-compliances. As I mentioned earlier, the pre-DA service allows applicants to gain feedback on whether they have all the necessary information and documents prior to lodging a DA. In addition to this, the pre-DA provides an opportunity to determine whether any variations to planning controls can be accepted or whether they would warrant design amendments or further justification. Pre-DAs can be processed quickly, and in most cases, you'll receive a detailed response within 2 to 3 weeks. Whilst with a normal DA, it can take much longer, at the moment, often 6 weeks or more, before a planning assessment can be undertaken and preliminary feedback can be provided, due to the fact that the planning assessment is usually not carried out until after the notification of the DA. In addition to the pre-DA service, development assessment reports can provide a useful resource for applicants who are seeking information about why a development may be approved or refused. Woollahra has 2 levels of planning panels, which frequently meet to determine larger or more controversial applications. All the agendas and minutes of these panels are publicly available on Council's website, and the agendas will include a detailed planning assessment report, which discusses the merits of the proposal and any non-compliances with planning controls. This can offer a useful insight into the reasons why development applications are supported or refused by Council. The final piece of advice I can give is consult widely with your neighbours prior to the lodgement of the DA with Council. All development applications are generally notified to neighbours within the immediate vicinity of the site, and in my experience, the majority of development applications within Woollahra are subject to objections, especially in the case of larger developments such as new dwellings or multi-residential development. Objections to DAs can result in delays and potential redesigns. If a large number of objections are received, it can trigger a development to go to the local planning panel for determination, which introduces less certainty for an applicant, as both the assessment staff and the panel will need to be satisfied in order for the development to be approved. By consulting with neighbours, many objections can be responded to or clarified prior to the lodgement of the DA. Many objections arise because neighbours do not have a complete understanding of the design or in response to minor issues such as landscaping or privacy. These can usually be addressed by a capable architect or a planner with minimal loss of development potential or amenity to a development. By addressing these issues early on, you reduce the scope of issues and the number of potential objections. Finally, disgruntled neighbours can also present a legal risk to a development consent. Whilst it is rare, third parties such as neighbours can challenge an approval under the Land and Environment Court's judicial review proceedings, and this does occasionally occur in Woollahra. This can result in stress and expense for applicants after the DA consent is granted, and in some cases, it can send them back to square one if a consent is struck out by the court. In concluding, there are a number of factors that are outside the control of applicants, which are currently leading to delays and obstacles in the assessment process. And Ellie and myself have both touched on these. Despite this, there are a number of straightforward steps that you can follow, which will minimise the risk of this and maximise your prospects for an approval. As I've outlined today, these include making sure your DA is well prepared and incorporates all required information and documents, making sure that your proposed development effectively responds to the planning controls, and where there are non-compliances, ensuring that they're effectively justified, and consulting with neighbours so as to proactively address any objection to the development. Thank you, and happy to move on to questions.
Thank you, Max. That was really helpful. We don't have any questions in the chat box, but perhaps if you want to ask a question, maybe put it in the chat box, and then just you can unmute yourself. I'll also just remind you, if you're going to ask a question, make it a general question, not specific to a DA or a site. Does anybody have any questions for Max or myself?
Hi, Ellie. I do. It's Kylie. Just a question in relation to what's the preferred method that council would prefer to receive an agreement from the neighbours?
A good question. So in cases where you've consulted with the neighbours and you've come to an agreement that you've modified the DA and they won't object, I think, just a written correspondence would be perfectly adequate. Even, an email or something like that would be fine.
Thanks, Max.
I'll just interrupt for a second. And one of the things I found was useful in Max's presentation was you can get a copy of the DA assessment report for either your DA or your previous DA or your neighbour's DA. It's something that we do in a way. It's not necessarily cheating, but you can at least see how council, for example, has calculated floor space or landscaping. It's very useful to look at the previous DA assessment reports. Max, Nadine has asked a question about the FSR control.
Sure. So the FSR control, the planning proposal's been with the Department of Planning since last year. I was under the impression that the control was actually going to be endorsed by the department imminently. I think we've been expecting it for a number of weeks, so I think it should be treated as if it could come into effect at any time at this point.
Thank you. I think that answers Richard's question also. Matthias has asked a question. Can you see that, Max?
Yeah, so what was when you say the new and the old regulation, referring to the FSR and the DCP changes?
Yeah, that's it.
So there weren't there will be savings and transitional provisions for these. So any DAs that are lodged before they come into effect would be assessed under the old controls. However, basically once the changes come into effect, as soon as that happens, the new controls will apply.
Thanks, Max. Martin has a question. Martin, do you want to just unmute yourself and ask the question in a bit more detail?
Yeah, look, it's not really a question. It's more of a discussion, Max. I'm finding that the level of information that is being required at times is an overkill. For example, I understand for a new dwelling or a new block of units, we do require to provide a lot of information. But sometimes for very simple DAs, I'm finding that I'm getting the DAs rejected on the portal very often because they want to, for example, there would be comments of nature that, in my opinion, is completely irrelevant to assessment. And I just want to discuss with you whether council kind of considers the application on its basis of complexity, or whether the person that reviews the submission at the end of the planning portal just goes through the checklist and just ticks boxes. Because I'm finding that and I'm sure it's not just me personally. I'm sure everybody else has the same issue where we submitting applications 3-4 times over, being rejected because the information is deemed not sufficient, but also I'll get the resubmission and then I'll get another email or whatever asking for further information. So there's a bit of process there, which in my opinion takes up a lot of staff resources, and I'm not sure if there's any control from your end in terms of how you can maybe train, the back end of your process to be a bit more logical about the process, if you know what I mean.
Sure, good question. So rejections, the portal has basically changed, the way that DAs are accepted.
Yeah.
Obviously, previously, you could come into council and lodge it in person. And if there was any issues or clarifications, it could be sorted out on the spot. Now, because of the way the portal works, sometimes, it is basically rejected on the portal and then the information has to be re-uploaded and re-lodged. In terms of rejection of DAs and 4.55s as well, there's quite specific reasons why a consent authority can reject DAs, and really it has to be either unclear or illegible. So, for example, if the drawings or the documentation were fundamentally, inaccurate, not clear or contradictory, that could form a reason for a rejection. Or if there's basic information that's not submitted, that's required under the planning circular, which is usually pretty basic stuff.
Yeah.
Plans, SEE, surveys, things like that. So beyond that, if it's beyond that, the council should be basically requesting the information as a stop the clock letter.
Yeah, that's right.
And I would just say, if it is being rejected, you can always question what specific information that's required under the form wasn't provided, and then re-lodge it or request a review of that decision. The difference between there is a difference between a rejection and a refusal, in that a rejection isn't a determination of the DA, so
That's right, yeah.
get refunded.
It basically nulls the whole submission. I think my question, Max, was more in relation to whether council internally has some form of review, because I'm assuming there is some system in place where somebody receives the submission from the portal, reviews it, comes back to the applicant with any additional information that may be required prior to formalizing the submission and accepting it. But then what happens is we go through the process of paying the fees. That's happened to me in 2 applications. So we submitted a couple of other items were requested, we've submitted, it was accepted, it went through, my client paid the fees. A couple of weeks later, I got an email saying that it's being rejected again because we need to withdraw because it's something else missing. So this process is very frustrating in a sense. I'm just giving you feedback in a way of how we've been already, I guess, reviewed in terms of the documentation submitted. Council has decided that it's acceptable. Fees were paid and processed. And then there's another review and it's been asked to be withdrawn. Look, I don't mind having that second and third and fourth review. That's understandable. But what I'm finding frustrating is the fact that rather than council saying, okay, guys, look, we need more information, please provide, they've asked us on 2 occasions to withdraw the application and resubmit. Now we have to go through the process of getting the refund back to the client. Resubmitting, what it really does, in my opinion, and puts a little extra, I guess, time and pressure on council resources unnecessarily, rather than just allowing the process to be. Sure, of course, you need more information, we're happy to provide, but don't make us withdraw if you've already accepted and then resubmit again, because it's just a waste of time and effort. So has council got any kind of review internally around this kind of, I guess, inefficient processes? Because in my opinion, it's just inefficient council process. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my opinion.
Sure. So I guess what the case that you're referring to is the stop the clock request.
Yeah, exactly.
You weren't able to provide the information within the 2-week period, is that?
No, it wasn't that. No, not at all.
Okay, so normally with a stop the clock request, there's a 2-week period to provide the information. If you can provide the information within the 2-week period, there's no reason to withdraw the application. If it couldn't be provided within 2 weeks, the guidelines from the state government are that it should be withdrawn, the fees refunded and resubmitted. But from what you were telling me, this application had already been lodged, so it had already been accepted for lodgement, and then issued with a stop the clock letter. A stop the clock letter should always have 2 weeks for you to provide the information.
Well, that letter, there was not a stop clock letter. I was basically request to withdraw and resubmit after submission. I think my discussion isn't so much about what's happening in this application. It's more just, I guess, bringing towards the discussion the point that it seems to me, in my opinion, there's a bit of an inefficient process. Because why would we have an application that's accepted, that's already gone through? You put a stop clock on it. That's fine. If we can't do it in 2 weeks, sometimes the things take 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks even, But withdrawing the application, right, and having to resubmit puts extra strain on resources, in my opinion, unnecessarily, because why not keep the stop clock on it? Therefore, your time frame isn't being impacted for assessment, and just let us deliver it in the time that we're able to. It just seems very inefficient. So I'm more asking whether council can look at these things in order to allow us to be, I guess, happier with the way that we do business with you, and separately to save your resources really internally, because you don't have to have that person spending 2 hours processing the paperwork again, reviewing the application again. I'll give applications 2, 3 hours, I'm assuming, of man time or, man hours to just process it, right? I don't know, whatever it might be. So is there any...
Martin, sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
I think we hear your point. It's we could have a whole webinar just on this point about council's quality control process. I might just cut it short there.
Yeah, that's okay.
Might just open it up to anybody else that have any questions. But if you want, you can speak to Max. I guess Max or myself offline after this.
Oh, I think I've expressed I just wanted to ask whether there's any internal kind of processes to review.
I presume there are, but,
and
but it's a lack of staffing also.
Yeah.
Which is an issue, not just for Woollahra, but all councils. Did anybody else have any other questions for Max? Okay, I guess on that note, thank you for your time and for joining here today. I'd like to obviously thank Max a lot and appreciate your time for preparing for today, as well as for accepting this invitation. This webinar has been recorded, so if I can distribute it to you later on, as well as the slides. I will be hosting another webinar similar to this with David Milliken, the manager at Sutherland Council. I don't have the date in front of me, but it's in the middle of July. We're going to be running this series of webinars, opening the conversation up with councils, and hopefully it'll create more dialogue and a smoother process for us as consultants and also for councils. And yeah, thank you for joining.
Thanks, Ali. Thank you, Max.
Everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Bye.